This is a CBS News special report. I'm Carissa Lawson. President Trump just announced on social media that Venezuelan president, Nicolás Maduro, has been captured and flown out of the country. This comes a few hours after the U.S. hit Venezuelan military targets in Caracas, the country's capital. Here is the social post in full. The United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolás Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. This operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. Details to follow. There will be a news conference today at 11 a.m. at Mar-a-Lago. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Our Washington correspondent, Ann O'Keefe, is joining us now by phone to tell us more about this. What are you hearing from the Trump administration right now?
Well, what we've heard is essentially what we've read. The statement from the president just a little while ago, quite stunning, that the United States has removed another country's leader and his wife, presumably forcibly against his will. Can't recall this ever happening, at least in modern history. The president, they're interestingly saying this operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. But just in the last few minutes, CBS News has learned Maduro was captured by Delta Force, the U.S. military's top special military or mission unit. This is the same unit that was responsible for killing al-Baghdadi, the ISIS leader, back in 2019. This is an elite unit of the U.S. Army that was involved in this strike or this operation here overnight. This began a few hours ago with apparent explosions over the skies of Caracas and other parts of Venezuela. And the president had given the U.S. military the green light to conduct land strikes inside Venezuela days before this actual operation. Two U.S. officials telling CBS News that they had discussed conducting the mission on Christmas Day, but U.S. airstrikes in Nigeria against ISIS targets took precedence that day. The days following Christmas opened up more potential strike windows to the U.S. military, but the operation's been held up for several days due to weather conditions over Venezuela. And the U.S. Or the officials tell CBS News that the military had wanted weather conditions advantageous to mission success. And for those of us who had been anticipating something might occur and wondering why they were so hung up on the weather, perhaps now we understand if this element of capturing and removing Maduro and his wife was in fact part of the operation all along. Already overnight, we've seen some pretty swift and fierce political opposition to this from Republicans, notably, and Democrats, among them the Utah Senator Mike Lee, who's been saying that there are questions now about sort of the constitutionality of this and why Congress wasn't consulted. We know, for example, the Senate Armed Services Committee saying nobody on that committee was informed about this beforehand. So there'll be all sorts of questions about why the Trump administration wanted to do this, why it felt compelled to do it now. And it comes amid swift or widespread public opposition to these operations. CBS News has polled this in recent weeks and suggested as many as 3 in 4 Americans believe Congress needs to authorize any kind of military operation like this. Widespread misunderstanding or a belief that the Trump administration hasn't explained why this is necessary. And so the fact that the president now is holding a news conference at 11 a.m. this morning at his Florida home perhaps will start filling in some of the details. But certainly there are big questions politically here in the United States, and certainly there will be around the world. We should point out the Venezuelans, the Cuban government, the Colombian government this morning calling on the United Nations and the Organization of American States, which is a hemisphere-wide body that deals with these kinds of political and military issues, should convene in emergency sessions to condemn this. And there are going to be widespread concerns around the world about the idea that the United States would go into another country, forcibly remove the person in charge, and whereabouts unknown at this point.
Now, this was a very swift military operation, Ed, with Maduro now being taken out of the country, as you've been talking about. What is the future of Venezuela at this point?
Well, that's a big part of this, and a big part of the concern certainly that policymakers in Washington will have and the rest of the world will have, is if you remove him, Maduro, someone who had flouted election results that were held in recent years in Venezuela, and you leave a vacuum there, either for the opposition government to be formed or for military leaders to lead it in the meantime, then it has the potential to create incredible economic, political, and security instability across that region. Remember, it's one of the largest oil producers in the world. It has been the source of waves of illegal immigration towards the United States in recent years, and there's been a real concern that further disruption of the government, of the economy, an economy that's already in shambles, could cause, mass migration out. Already overnight, we're hearing the Colombian government, for example, mobilizing military forces along its borders, concerned about the potential of an exodus of Venezuelans yet again. And there will be great question about who took Maduro or where he is. Is he here in the United States facing charges? Is he headed to a third country? There had been talk in recent weeks that perhaps Turkey, for example, would provide him safe haven. He's close with President Erdogan of Turkey. Will he, if U.S. law enforcement, as the president says, is involved, was he removed to face charges in the United States? If that's the case, then we're looking at something like General Manuel Noriega from Panama back in the late 80s, early 90s, when he faced charges here in the United States. But you're right, there will be grave questions across Venezuela this morning. Who's in charge? Is the United States helping prop up somebody else? And if it is Maria Corina Machado, the woman who just recently won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work as an opposition leader there in Venezuela, how is she getting back into the country? How is the United States and others ensuring her safety when the Maduro government had made clear that if she left, she would be considered a fugitive from justice? So all sorts of big questions like this, and just most especially on what legal or national security grounds does the United States feel justified in conducting this kind of strike? The president, his team are going to have to answer for that in the coming hours and days because Washington's demanding it, because polling would suggest the country's demanding it, and because the world's going to want to know.
Let's talk a little bit about how Americans might be feeling about this. How does the current administration or this action against Venezuela actually align with the president's America First promise of avoiding large-scale overseas commitments?
Well, that's certainly a big question that he himself will have to answer. We've asked him over the last several months when it comes up to explain why this is necessary. And he broadly cites two big reasons. One, his concern, again, about the wave of immigrants who have come from Venezuela in recent years, contributing to the record numbers of people who were illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. Of course, that has essentially ended over the last year. He claimed without proof that there were concerns the Venezuelan government was emptying its jails and sending its worst people towards the United States. No evidence of that. But the broad concern about immigration and the instability that can cause has been one reason. The second reason, of course, is the concerns about the flow of illicit drugs. His government has cited this group Tren de Aragua, which is seen as a drug organization to some extent, and he's classified now, or his government has, narco-terrorists out of Venezuela who have been sending illegal drugs, and that's the basis of the attacks on vessels over the last several weeks. Now more than at least 34 strikes that have killed at least 115 people by the CBS News tally at least, and the seizing of those oil tankers then in the Pacific as well. All of this justification that this is a national security issue, that too many Americans have died because of illegal drugs. But the concern there is the president cites fentanyl. Fentanyl, of course, flows from supplies from China into Mexico primarily, then into the United States. The illicit drugs coming out of Venezuela predominantly head towards Europe. And so many of the president's critics have said that even isn't justification for what you're doing if you're concerned about drugs, because most of Venezuela's illegal drugs never get to the United States. You want to fight that issue generally, go right ahead. But don't cite that as the primary reason when it comes to Venezuela, because their drugs don't necessarily come in and cause the harm and the death and the violence that the president cites as a reason for this. So again, a lot of justification is going to have to be given for this, or explanation, in the coming hours. And how do you square, as you said correctly, the idea that he has said he didn't want to start any other wars or major military operations, but now has conducted one this morning That includes the Army's most elite unit, the Delta Force, and other operations that have taken out other installations across that country.
Ed, you touched on this a little bit, the unintended consequences of a regime change, as we've seen in the past with Libya, for example, when Gaddafi was overthrown, and even on Iraq when Saddam Hussein was overthrown as well. Sometimes there are consequences that aren't foreseen.
Yeah, and that again, and that's one of the reasons why this president has said he didn't want to start these things in the first place. The instability that this will cause there in Venezuela and across South America. There's been grave concern in Colombia, in Brazil, in Peru and Chile about what this could mean for people flowing into their country from Venezuela. There's been concern about oil markets and who controls the oil supply in that country. And then just the general principle that the United States has done this. If you've done it here, if you've attacked nuclear weapons sites in Iran the way you have in the past several months, the ISIS attacks on Nigeria on Christmas Day, what's stopping the U.S. president from doing other things in other parts of the world, and how will the world react to that? Or how might other actors, other organizations respond to this if the United States is carrying out these kinds of operations?
Did he need congressional authorization for this action, Ed?
No, there has not been, and our colleagues have confirmed this morning that at least the Senate Armed Services Committee, which is one of those committees responsible for military operations or overseeing them, was not consulted in advance. Was the general concept of something potentially happening one day telegraphed in recent weeks by the president and his top aides? Yes. The president, among other things, had said Maduro had threatened Maduro directly. And even though Maduro in recent days had suggested again that talks should occur between him and President Trump, and they apparently did in late November, the Secretary of State said before Christmas that even if there were to be talks again with Maduro, it wasn't something that would result necessarily in concrete moves, because Maduro had never been trusted, at least in recent years, to sit down for talks and then actually follow through on anything discussed. So it would signal here, certainly, that any hope of discussions had been put off, and that this action is necessary. We should point out, if you're wondering as you see these images, what exactly was struck. A spokesman for the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, tells CBS News there were at least 4 sites struck. The main military base in Caracas, known as Fuerte Tiuna, the main air base in Caracas, known as La Carlota, a signal antenna that is called El Volcan, somewhere there in the Caracas area, and then a seaport on the Caribbean coast known as La Guaira port. So all significant pieces of military and naval and logistical importance taken out. And then, of course, the president announcing that Maduro and his wife have been removed from Venezuela. Where they're going, who took them there, whether this was willingly or forcibly, whether Maduro had any sense this could be coming, all of that unknown at this hour and to be answered in the coming hours and days.
And what about any perhaps casualties out of all of this? Are we hearing anything about that?
No, not yet. We'll have to check with colleagues or outlets that are in Venezuela, but certainly looking at these images were people in any of these facilities, you would think that they were at least injured.
And just frightening images for people who are there watching this happen and hearing the explosions all around them. And just you can just only imagine what they were going through as well, Ed. Thank you so much for giving us all of these details about what's happening in Venezuela at this time. We appreciate that. Well, here's a closer look at Nicolás Maduro. Venezuela's leader has been in power since 2013. The U.S. does not formally recognize Maduro as the head of state and has not for years. Maduro has been charged with narco-terrorism, and there was a reward for $50 million for his arrest. Again, President Trump says Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro and his wife have been captured and flown out of the country. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and on CBS Saturday morning. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Carissa Lawson.